Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Michael Lovejoy here in the Love Zone, here at the African American Heritage Museum here in Atlantic City, New Jersey. You never would guess who we have here. We have the culturalist, the historian, the museum iconic, Mr. Ralph Hunter. We'll be back in 2 at 2, where Mr. Hunter will be here talking to us about some of the history of Atlantic City and some of the other things that goes on in the museum. We'll see you in 2 at 2. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Zone once again, right here at the African American Museum here in Atlantic City. Guess who we have here with us? The one, the only, Mr. Ralph Hunter. Mr. Hunter, thank you so much for coming to the Love Zone.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you here. It took a long time for us to get down here to get you. I know you're busy. We know you got a lot of things to do. Let's get down to the brass tacks.
Wonderful.
Let me ask you this, sir. How did you get into the museum and artifact collecting business?
Well, I was always interested in African American history. As a child growing up in Philadelphia, the teacher used to read a story to us all the time when we were in kindergarten, first grade. The name of the story is Little Black Sambo. And when she read the story, I used to always take my hands and put them in my ears and never listen to the words, because at lunchtime or recess, the kids used to call me Little Black Sambo.
Sambo. You know, a lot of us went through that Sambo syndrome.
Yeah. And so I was very much offended by it. And so one time, about 40 years ago, I was able to amass enough money to start collecting African American memorabilia. And I went into an antique store in North Carolina, and while there, I asked the lady if she had anything that was black or African American, and she indicated to me that she had one item that was in the back room, and I told her I had cash money, I would buy it. She goes into the back room and comes out with this book, Little Black Sambo. Now I'm regressing, being 5, 6 years old again, and remembering what a terrible time I had with my life. People called me Little Black Sambo. So I purchased the book unwillingly, because I promised her that I would purchase anything she had. And I started walking out of the door of the antique shop, and I said to myself, I'm going to buy every Little Black Sambo book in the world and have a big bonfire and burn them all up.
Oh, yes, sir.
So that didn't happen. I took the book out in my car, opened it up, and I started reading it. And when I was reading the book, there was a wonderful story. It talked about this little black boy whose mother made him a new jacket, new pair of pants, new slippers, and borrowed his dad's umbrella and went out to the jungles. And the tiger saw him out in the jungle. And the tiger said to him, if you don't give me that jacket, I'm going to eat you up. He says, why are you going to eat me up? He says, I'm going to eat you up because I want that jacket. He says, please take the jacket, please don't eat me up. Another tiger comes along, says, if you want to give me those pants, what are you going to do with the pants? Put them on my front legs so I can be the most handsome tiger in the jungle. Third tiger comes along and says, if you don't give me those shoes, I'm going to eat you up. What are you going to do with those shoes? I'm going to put them in my ears so I can become the most fascinating tiger in the jungle. And the fourth tiger comes along and sees the umbrella and says, if you don't give me the umbrella, I'm going to eat you up. So what are we going to do with the umbrella? Put it on my tail. So as I prance around the jungle, I can be the most handsome tiger in the jungle. So as they were prancing around the jungle, they started going around, chasing each other, going faster and faster. They decided to take off all their clothing and put it alongside the tree. Little Black Sambo is standing in his foundation garment, sees the tigers chasing each other, and gets closer and closer to his clothing. So the tigers started going around this tree, and he started going around the tree faster, 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 faster. They went around the tree so fast they melted and turned into butter. Little Black Sambo sees that the tigers have turned into butter, puts his clothing on, and heads back home and tells his mother what occurred. And along comes his dad home from work and has this urn on top of this, gathers all the butter together and brings it home, and he asked Little Black Sambo about his day, and he told him how terrible it was. And so he decided, what would you like to eat today? He said, after a day like I had, I could eat 100 pancakes. So his mother made him 100 pancakes. Dad ate like 87, mother ate like 33 pancakes. But the moral of that story is how you can take a negative and turn it into a positive. When you were growing up as a kid, your parents used to make you pancakes or waffles or French toast on a Saturday. What kind of syrup you used to put in your pancakes?
Karo syrup.
Karo syrup. Well, most people up north here would put edamame.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that's the story of Little Black Sambo. And that started the fascinating for the collection. That was one book. And now I went out and purchased another 3,000 items of African American history. And that started the collection. I opened a museum down in Newtonville back in '02.
Newtonville, New Jersey?
Newtonville, New Jersey.
Yes, sir.
Now we have 3 museums, and it's grown by really, really great leaps and bounds. Now we have in our archives more than 11,000 pieces of African American memorabilia and
Yes,
history
sir.
and books. And
Yes, sir.
it's really, truly a treat. And that's the story from being a little kid growing up in a school in Philadelphia, being able to have a museum today in Atlantic City.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, you know, a lot of us have been plagued by that idea. I remember growing up in Mississippi, where we had the Jane and Dick, and then we had the little dog called Spot.
Yeah, Run with Dick and Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, the blackest thing in the photo was Spot.
Right.
You know, so this is how we got our identification from the educational system down in Mississippi at that time. Now, I understand, sir, that you got a great inspiration here from the just analogy that you just gave in reference to that book that you got. Now, what is the greatest piece that you've gotten in your years of collecting?
Well, that's asked to me by many different news people. Ask that question. I always say the last piece that I got is the most exciting one. I'm going to be down in Bridgeton, New Jersey today,
Yes, sir.
looking at some artwork done by an African American back in the early 1900s, 1905. He did 12 pieces of African American artwork, but they were not African Americans. And that's why I was so excited about to see this artist who painted this work. It's not African American work. So I'm going down to purchase that work
Yes, sir.
this afternoon. So
Do you
that's
get-
going to be the greatest piece I've ever had. Every day there's something new and something different.
Yes, sir.
I get calls from all over. Someone called me last week. They have a set of andirons with black people in them. We put in the fireplace. And I've been looking for these for about 20 years.
What kind of irons are they?
Andirons, they go in the fireplace. You set the wood on it in the
Okay.
fireplace
Yes, sir.
to burn to make the heat.
Okay.
And they're African Americans.
Yes.
So I'm very interested in that. I'm constantly looking for new and exciting things. One of the things we're going to be doing next month is bringing in Temple Number 9, which is a temple in Atlantic City that opened back in the 50s, early 50s. And we're
Temple number 10?
number 10. I said
Yes, sir.
number 9.
Yes, sir. Temple number 10.
Temple number 10.
Yes, sir.
You should kick me early.
Oh, I won't do that, sir.
Temple number 10, and that's going to be a great new exhibit. It will be here
Absolutely.
for the month of April.
Were you here during the inception of the opening of the first house here in Atlantic City from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
Yes, it was.
And who was the minister at that time?
I don't know who the minister was at that time, but I was a part of Atlantic City. I worked and I raised my family here in Atlantic City.
Yes, sir.
You know,
Okay. Now, were you born and raised here in Atlantic City?
I was born and raised in Philadelphia.
Okay. When did you come to Atlantic
I
City?
came here in the early 50s, 1952.
And what was the landscape here in Atlantic City like at that particular
It was a mecca. It was really, really quite interesting. I, being a young 15-year-old kid coming to Atlantic City with one of my classmates from school, his mother and father lived here, and he went to school in Philadelphia. And we came down, I'll never forget, Easter Sunday, and it was just amazing to see all the great things going on in Atlantic City. I saw so many restaurants, so many hotels, so many cabs, so many churches, so many bars, so many restaurants. It was really, really, I'd never seen anything coming out of West Philadelphia. I'm a PK kid, by the way.
Yes, sir.
My father was a preacher.
Oh.
So I didn't experience any of this kind of life going on, such as I saw in Atlantic City. And I fell in love with it. And I returned here the next summer, got myself a summer job, and I've been here pretty much ever since.
So you saying the business of black people was thriving here at that
It
particular
was
time?
incredible.
Was there any segregation going on in Atlantic City at that time?
None that I knew of. The only segregation was that African Americans lived on the north side of Atlantic City. And if you want to say segregation, say if the schools are segregated or not, the schools happen to be on the north side. So that's where the kids went to school at. And they went to high school, of course, down at the Atlantic City High School. But segregation was the boundary lines was from Atlantic Avenue back to Venice Park, and from Arkansas Avenue to Connecticut Avenue. That's an area where all African Americans live. If you take a look at that map right straight back over there, you'll see a red area over there, and that's the area where the African Americans lived at and worked out of in Atlantic City.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And they built and supported the growth of Atlantic City since day one. They came here as carpenters, electricians, and built the Atlantic City's hotels, its restaurants, its boardwalk. They were the common laborers who did that work.
Yes, sir. Very skilled people that came up to do the work.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And the business people who came here, most of the nightclub owners and those folks came out of the deep south. And they would come here and work in the summertime as a summer job, and then go back to school in the fall of the year or go back to college.
Yes, sir.
It was a great way for African Americans to earn a college degree right here in Atlantic City. and they wanted to become doctors, lawyers, and educators.
Absolutely.
And in our own little community here, we had 14 African American doctors on the north side. We had many churches, many restaurants, black-owned hotels, restaurants. It was just an amazing area to see. I had never seen an area so large as Atlantic City that was owned and operated by African Americans on the north side. Had its own, pretty much its own police department, its own fire station. Blacks were assigned to the north side of town.
Yes, sir.
Most black police officers didn't work the south side of town in the early 50s. And the one fire station on Grand Avenue was housed by African Americans.
Well, some of the unknown caveats that people don't know about Atlantic City. Could you give us just a couple of caveats that they don't know about the African American community here in Atlantic City?
I think the most important thing that folks should know and understand about Atlantic City was its neighborhoods. In its neighborhoods, the doctors, the preachers, the educators, the people who ran the YMCA, all lived on the north side. So there was a teacher living here, or a minister living here, or a police officer living here, or a firefighter. It was a community of people who cared about their community. They cared about educating their children. And what has happened since 1954 when Brown versus Board of Education took place, now African Americans no longer have to stay in a community that was bordered by certain boundaries. Now African Americans can take their dollars and spend them on the south side of town. And not only Atlantic City, but Detroit, Gary, Indiana, south side of Chicago. These areas were self-contained areas owned and operated by African Americans. And that has changed. And so as that decision came down, when blacks would only spend their money in their own neighborhoods, now the money leaves the neighborhoods. And once the money leaves the neighborhoods, it turns white, it never turns black again. So that's how the so-called ghetto was developed. It was developed through Brown versus Board of Education.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of folks will look at me, I've been at college giving a lecture, they'll look and say, well, why do you say that, Mr. Hunter? Why do you say that Brown versus Board of Education changed America for not only for the better, but for the worse? How could that possibly be? And a professional stand up and said, I wouldn't have my PhD if it wasn't. You're absolutely right. But what is your zip code today? Your zip code has changed. It's not
Yes,
the one
sir.
that your forefathers had. So that changed the makeup of black communities around America.
Yes, sir.
And I think that was the turning point of what happened to self-contained African American communities.
Yes, sir.
There's
Well,
only 4 things that survive in the black communities today.
Yes, sir.
You know what they are? It's the black church,
Yes, sir.
it's the funeral director, it's the barber shop, and the beauty parlor. Those are the only things that African Americans come back to their neighborhood to use their services. Even if they change their zip code, they will still come back for the church, the funeral director, beauty parlor, and the barber shop. They'll still come back. But the other businesses are part of a melting pot, and they have changed, and they're no longer a part of an African American district, whether it's Gary.
He's getting a call from the Urban Renewal District to come and rebuild this African American community.
Thank you. So I apologize for that.
Yes, sir.
But I think that's one of the things that folks don't know or don't recognize, how the neighborhoods change. A neighborhood determines what's going to happen in its city and in its community.
Yes, sir.
Strong black neighborhoods where they no longer exist.
Yes, sir.
And because that people now change their zip codes and they move other places, they kind of give up on something that's pretty important, and that's they give up on their vote. That vote was a powerful vote back in the 20s and 30s when Nucky Johnson ran Atlantic City. I was a consultant for Boardwalk Empire for HBO, and as he ruled the areas, Atlantic City survived because of Nucky Johnson. Took some 25,000 black people who lived on the north side and registered them as Republicans so that he could win the whole county. And that's how he ruled and ran Atlantic County.
Now, since you brought that up, Boardwalk Empire,
Yeah.
how accurate was that portrayal?
Well, the book was very accurate.
Yes, sir.
The book was written by Judge Nelson Johnson, who wrote a perfect book about Atlantic City, did his research, and worked very, very hard to put it. But once it became a part of HBO, what sells, and they got 19 Emmy Awards for,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
for the portrayal of the Boardwalk Empire, was drugs, the prohibition, sex, and violence. That's what sells. And so the story that HBO got was, of course, re-edited by Scorsese, who was the director of the film, of the series, I should say. Made a the book was perfect. The book told an accurate account of what happened in Atlantic City. But to get 19 Emmys, you have to go outside of the box.
Absolutely.
And that's what they did, and that's why it was such a great success.
Yes, sir. Now, since you mentioned drugs and prostitution and some of the other vices that were used to portray this thing, in the late 70s, 80s, we had more of the same with the proliferation of drugs and the effect that it had on the black community. Were you present during that time?
Yeah, it was not just the black community, it was black communities. It just didn't happen in Atlantic City. It was part of what happened in Camden, New Jersey, whether it was Newark, New Jersey, or whether it was the south side of Chicago. The influx of drugs into our neighborhoods kind of changed everything for the worse.
Yes, sir.
I feel as though that the drug situation was, black folks didn't have airplanes, they didn't have places to grow drugs or to raise their crops. They were brought into our communities. And it's sad to see a youngster today at age 21 not think he's going to live past age 25.
Yes, sir.
Because of what happens in the neighborhoods. And I look forward to our leaders who left our communities to come back to our communities, to mentor, to be part of what took place in the 50s and the 30s and here in Atlantic City and throughout the world, for that sake.
Yes, sir.
But I think we have to come back. We have to bring the folks who escaped and got out of our neighborhoods, bring them back home and let them be part of a mentoring program to our youngsters and tell them how dangerous drugs and the life of drugs is going to be for not only for them, for their children, for their parents, their grandparents as well. Everybody hurts when a child is shot.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we're going to take a pause for the cause. We're going to be right back with the culturalist historian, the great Mr. Ralph Hunter, in 2 and 2. We'll see you in a minute. We're right back here at the Love Zone here. Once again, we're going to wrap up and fade to black with the one, the only Mr. Ralph Hunter. And we're going to give Mr. Hunter an opportunity to pump up the African American Museum right here in Atlantic City. But before we do that, I want to ask Mr. Hunter a question, and then he can pump up the African American Museum here. Mr. Hunter, the importance of the rich history and cultural importance of the ongoings and the history here in Atlantic City that is taking place and futurely that's going to take place. Could you give some inspiration, perhaps some direction to our generation that's coming after us about the importance of learning to curate and to be proactive in preserving your history?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important that the next generation coming up, we're working with PAL in Atlantic City, and they have a summer program where we take 3 or 4 students from their summer program, we bring them into the museum, and we teach them how a museum is to be operated. This year we're going to have 4 more students come in, one repeating from last year, because once they graduated from high school, they can't be in the program. But working with these youngsters from Atlantic City, whether they're male or female, whether they're African American or non-African American, they're here to learn about history.
Yes, sir.
And learn the wonderful contribution that African Americans not only paid to society, but paid to their forefathers. Our forefathers were giants. Our forefathers were preachers, they were doctors, they were lawyers. One of our forefathers, his name was Dr. Forsyth, who could not fly a plane and had to go to Canada to become a pilot. And he was a physician on Kentucky Avenue in Atlantic City, right over top of the Club Harlem, so to say. And he had to go to Canada where he got his pilot's license. He bought a plane for $2,000, and he flew that plane from Atlantic City's Bader Field, which is the very first airport in the United States of America, was in Atlantic City.
Really?
Yes, sir. And he flew that plane from there to California, along with Commander Anderson, Chief Anderson went on to teach the Tuskegee Airmen
Yes,
how
sir.
to fly.
You know, by the way, my uncle is an honorary member of
Is
the
that right?
Tuskegee. Yes, he is. Preacher Howard out of Waukegan, Illinois.
Preacher Howard.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
An honorary member of the Tuskegee.
How do you become an honorary member?
Well, he learned how to fly,
Right.
and he knew several of the Tuskegee Airmen,
Yeah.
and he flew on that inaugural journey. I think it was from
In Europe?
to Washington D.C.
Okay.
You know, in paying homage to them.
Right,
He
right.
flew on that inaugural journey to Washington D.C. I think it was.
And our kids don't know that Anderson and Forsyth were from Atlantic City.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Atlantic City people. They have to know that in politics, that we had the very first African-American mayor, Big Jim Usry, who worked at Club Harlem.
Yes, sir.
He was a maitre d' at Club Harlem.
Yes, sir.
It was just amazing, and how Pierre Hollingsworth
Yes, sir.
was a fire chief, was the first deputy chief in the history of Atlantic City's fire department.
Yes, sir.
There's so much history. We can go to the very first female police officer in the United States of America was hired by Nucky Johnson in the late 20s. Her name was Maggie Creswell. She was the first female police officer, black or white, in the United States of America. So Nucky took care of his people in Atlantic City. He makes sure that blacks own jitneys on Pacific Avenue.
Yes.
We have a photograph of a black jitney owner. It's truly, truly amazing to know the life of a lady by the name of Madam Sarah Spencer Washington, who we have on exhibit here. Madam Washington was a multi-millionaire. She owned a company called Apex
And
Hair
what was the
Care.
line of business?
She was a hair care business.
Hair care. Okay.
Hair care.
Like
She- Madam C.J. Walker.
Yes, sir,
Yeah,
yes.
but Walker died in 1919.
Okay.
And Madam Washington came to Atlantic City in the early 20s.
Okay.
And started a hair care company.
Yes, sir.
And beauty schools. Multi-millionaire. She goes into John Wanamaker's in Philadelphia to buy a mink coat. Nobody would wait on her. They didn't know she was a multi-millionaire. And so one of the owners recognized her, and she said to him, "I want a coat like the one I got 2 weeks ago, but 6 inches longer."
Yes, yes.
$3,000 she paid for a coat.
Absolutely. Well,
She was
somebody missed out on commission, a great commission.
She was the very first black to have a float on the Miss America pageant on the boardwalk in
Yes.
Atlantic City in 1956. Madam Washington was the first to own a golf course in the United States of America. It was called Apex Country Club. It's over in Pomona. It's no longer owned by the family, but the golf course is still in existence today.
And it's called what today?
It's called, don't quote me, they changed the name of it. I can't remember. It's Pines
Blue
something.
Pines?
No, that's,
Blue Heron Pines?
no, this is over on the other side.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Oh,
on
okay,
the other
okay.
side. Blue Heron, I know you played Blue Heron. But they recently, she recently, not recently, back in that time, she donated an area for a bridge in Galloway Township.
Yes, sir.
So there's a bridge in Galloway Township with Madam Sarah Spencer Washington's name on it. She gave them the land.
So you say that to say what, sir? For
I'm
our
say-
young people?
I'm saying to our young people, we come from kings and queens.
Yes.
We come from great doctors, great lawyers, great educators, and great entrepreneurs. All of the youngsters out there today don't have to work for the Fortune 500 companies. They can develop a product, they can develop a company of their own, and let people come to them to purchase their product. And I think if more and more people would come back to our communities and teach our children how to become entrepreneurs, as did Madam Sarah Spencer Washington, she taught African American women how to own their own business, to own their own beauty parlor. And it's just a wonderful way of telling children that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. You know, you have an opportunity to better yourself, become educated, to learn more and more about your community, and give back to your community once you become successful.
Well, there you have it from the great one himself, Mr. Ralph Hunter, the curator, the culturalist, and the icon here in Atlantic City. This is Michael Lovejoy, and I want to close in saying this. I'm so happy to be here with you in the Love Zone, Mr. Hunter. Thank you so much for allowing us to come. And this is Michael Lovejoy in the Love Zone with Mr. Ralph Hunter. We'll see you next time. Over and out.
Thank you.
Thank you.